It's finally here. One of my most anticipated games of 2022, the Callisto Protocol. Formed from the remnants of Visceral Studios and directed by Glen Schofield, the same beautifully demented mind that cooked up the Dead Space series. The Callisto Protocol is the debut game for Striking Distance Studios, launching on PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC on the 2nd of December 2022. To say I was hyped going into this would be an understatement. When we first heard about Callisto all the way back at the Game Awards in 2020, I felt my eyebrow twinge. Flash forward to the Summer Game Fest in 2022, and we were treated to an extended gameplay sequence. As soon as I saw the Dead Space-esque stomp, I had no choice but to lock in a pre-order. Now after all the anticipation, I've completed the game, and in this review, I'm going to break down what works, and the many issues that hold it back from its potential. Now for those that haven't played it through yet, don't worry, I'm going to split this review up as we go to keep your pure innocent eyes away from any major spoilers. With this review, as with all my others, I'm going to break it down into plot, gameplay and presentation. Now let's dive in. Space, the final frontier. This is the voyage of the UJC Charon. Its mission? To deliver packages in the Jovian moons, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out parcels and drop them to their destination, to boldly go where the United Jupiter Company has gone many times before. Sorry, I couldn't resist. The year is 2320. Man has done it. We have become a space-bearing species with colonies on the moon as well as the Jovian moons. Our story begins with Jacob Lee and Max Barrow having just completed a successful delivery on Europa. They soon find out they're hauling more than cargo. They've got a stowaway. The terrorist group, the Outer Way, has boarded the ship, and in all the commotion that ensues, the ship is forced to crash land on Callisto. Crash landing, I imagine, is never a great experience, but if you manage to survive, it's going to make one hell of a story to tell your mates back at the bar. Unfortunately for Jacob, he's landed in the worst place imaginable, a prison planet, and the guards have a zero-tolerance rule when it comes to accidental landings. Jacob and the terrorist leader Danny are taken and quickly introduced to their new home, Black Iron Prison. Jacob doesn't have long to get acclimatized to his new life, as the prison soon descends into anarchy. The guards are offline, the building is on fire, and the prisoners are mutated into the stuff of nightmares. In all the calamity, Jacob escapes his cell with the help of fellow prisoner Elias Porter, and they form a plan to escape the prison, to escape this hell. And that is how the game begins. Told through a combination of cutscenes and audio diaries, the story of Callisto has a fantastic premise, albeit not exactly unique. It's a splice between Alien 3 and Dead Space. You put an everyman into an out-of-this-world situation, but root the location in reality so us as an audience can identify with it. The issue with these influences is they aren't exactly even. Dead Space is a masterpiece, a revolutionary survival horror game whose environment is as much a character as the extensive world building brought through its video logs. And then you have Alien 3. Callisto seems to straddle the line between them. It doesn't live up to the world of Dead Space, but it's not completely forgettable either. Unfortunately, I've come away from the experience lamenting a number of problems that hold it back from what could have been. Firstly, the audio diaries. In Callisto, they are here, but there isn't that many, and the ones you do find don't grow the world or the intrigue, they just exist. When audio diaries are done well, they serve to expand on the lore, to give us the background on what's happened here, or at its best, can make us care for a character we never even got a chance to meet. Games have been nailing this for a long time. Dead Space, The Last of Us, BioShock. They don't get in your way. They let you explore the area accompanied by these haunting tales. In Callisto, Not only do they fall flat on intrigue, they also lock you in place while you listen. Now this wouldn't be an issue in most games, but in Callisto, the pacing is artificially slowed every few minutes by crawling through a duct or squeezing through tight spaces. If the audio logs could accompany you through these moments, it wouldn't feel like such a slog, like the game just hits the pause button. It seems like the design was to keep them short and sweet because you're rooted in place, whereas they could have expanded on their length, turning them into something to look forward to finding, and at the same time lessen the tedium of traversal. It would have been a win-win. But no, that would have been too convenient, I guess. The second issue is the environmental storytelling. It just doesn't make sense. You'll encounter writing on the walls, but why would anyone write this stuff? How long has it been there for? It's not like Dead Space where Isaac arrives late to the party. Here, it's happening in real time. There's multiple times you see "don't make a noise." But surely, spray painting this on a wall creates noise. How do they manage to do this several times in different locations? I will never know. The world building proposed by these messages did the exact opposite. It took me out of the world. Imagine in Dead Space you see "cut off their limbs" written in the same blood-soaked scrawl just before every major encounter with the necromorphs. You don't, because 1, it's not needed, and 2, it would break the illusion the game is creating to keep you enthralled in its world. Parking that to the side, and what is the biggest issue of them all by far, is the plot feels unoriginal and the characters underdeveloped. Now I'm going to move this into spoiler territory to explain this properly, so skip ahead to the timestamp shown if you're avoiding them. It doesn't take a keen eye to spot the similarities between Dead Space and Callisto's story, but here's a few. Unitology is built on the idea of transformation and rebirth, and they need the marker to ascend the next phase of humanity. The commonality is an organization fixated on human evolution to make us equipped for the harshness of space. Both of these require outbreaks to happen. Both outbreaks are as a result of aliens mankind discovered. Both organizations have seats of power in their societies. Both mention the line, "the next stage of evolution." It's clear as day Callisto wouldn't be here without Dead Space, and that's fine. I don't mind similar themes or hell, even similar stories. The issue is that what came before did it to a much higher level. Dead Space set up the Church of Unitology from the off. It gave lengthy written documents and logs from key crew members, and as the adventure unfolds, you realize for yourself that the Church is the true villain all along. And this is then confirmed when your own crewmate betrays you. In Callisto, you get the idea the Warden is dodgy, but you don't really get anything more from him or his backstory, outside of 2 side rooms which give extremely vague bits of information. The times you see him are mostly pre-recorded generic holograms, where the first real message he gives you personally is when he blows up your escape shuttle 2/3 into the experience, which confirms your suspicion. But then instead of continuing to build on the collective, the reason why the protocol exists in the first place, it's left until the Warden decides to go all villain mode and monologue his intent at you. You see what I'm saying here? Dead Space drip feeds its information, its world, its backstory, and assumes you'll figure it out before it's fully revealed how deep their influence runs. Here, it's nothing, and then a fuck ton of insight. One feels earned, the other feels forced. And it's the same deal with the wider cast. Let's take our main man Jacob. Jacob, throughout, is at odds with Danny as she suspects he had a part to play in the outbreak on Europa, which he denies. Multiple times in the story, Jacob is haunted by visions of his crewmate Max, who takes the role of the ghost of Christmas past, which I assume symbolizes his conscience, unless he's actually infected and having hallucinations, which again doesn't make much sense as that's not a symptom of the disease. Anyway, when we get the reveal that yes, Jacob was involved, and it was his own greed and ignorance that led to the events here in Black Iron, that's supposed to be a big reveal. Now I assume this is meant to cause an emotional response, or at least a "what the fuck?" But no, it didn't. The reason for this is how underdeveloped the characters are. The Warden mentions a line right near the end of the game.
I'm not gonna let her die.
Your friend. I've been watching you. You and your so-called friend. You're not the innocent you claim to be. You've proven that you'll do just about anything to ensure your own survival.
Now, where across the game did we ever see Jacob do anything solely for his own interest at the expense of others? Did the game give us the opportunity to see him throw people under the bus so he could get out alive? No. So when the warden says this, and Jacob chooses to save Danny with the vaccine rather than take a free escape pod, it didn't have its intended impact, as we didn't have the opportunity to see how far he's come, to see the sacrifices and betrayals he'll make to ensure he looks after number one. It's underdeveloped, and the textbook example of underdevelopment is this guy right here, Captain Ferris. So he gets thrown out of a window into what I assume is a limitless void, somehow survives that, gets infected by the enemy who grabbed him, and then can warp to key points in the story to show off how far his infection has come. That's his purpose, to show an alpha. We don't learn about him. He doesn't feel like a goading opponent, a central antagonist. He's just plot, in bold letters. It bothers me so much because I can see the different ways this could have gone. Imagine if the entire story was a cat and mouse game where he's always closing paths, trying to kill you, or hell, even communicating with you on the comms before he ultimately betrays you. The payoff to a final confrontation would have impact. It would feel earned. But just like its wider plot, Callisto's characters are rushed in all the wrong places. The final issue I have with the plot is the ending. What the hell is that cliffhanger? Why didn't they cut it with the station exploding and Danny flying off? That would have been way more effective than the bullshit buy the season pass to see the actual ending finale that we got. Even if the DLC opened with that glimmer of hope from Dr. Mercer, I would be way more receptive of it than this, as it feels like the ending has been artificially cut off to make way for downloadable content. Now I'm sure that's not the case, and Glen Schofield has come out to say as much, but it will put that thought into the minds of many players, I guarantee you that. A dark ending, where the player has a chance to reflect on the journey and the sacrifice that's been made, is powerful, and it's undone by this pointless cliffhanger. To summarize this section, the plot of the Callisto Protocol is unoriginal. It's like a made-for-TV version of Dead Space with less ambition. It's diluted, lacking the intrigue, depth and world building that invite you to dig deeper beneath the surface. Its cast are let down by a lack of development, and its antagonists fail to realize their roles due to a lack of exposure. Putting a new spin on an existing concept isn't a bad thing, but failing to capture what made that so memorable in the first place underserves its potential. That last section was extremely negative, so it's time to lift the mood a little. The gameplay. Callisto includes several hallmarks from Dead Space, and leverages this with new mechanics to make the experience feel different from what came before. Not all of them are effective, but let's keep it positive for the moment. In terms of what came before, Kinesis, it's back. This time referred to as Grip. With it, you can pick up objects around the environment to hurl at enemies, from random bits of scenery to exploding canisters, and that's to be expected. Where Grip differentiates itself is how it interacts with enemies. In Callisto, you could straight up grab an enemy and hurl them right into each other, or into the scenery for massive damage. Due to this fundamental change, Striking Distance wisely realized that having infinite use of Grip would make the entire experience a cakewalk. So to combat this, they put a usage meter on it. Depending if it's an object or an enemy, will change how much meter this depletes, with enemies using substantially more. Using the meter wisely becomes essential to your success, as even though this resource recharges, it does so at an extremely slow pace, meaning spamming it is out of the question. You can find batteries in the environment which will enable a full recharge, but this resource is rare, and there's nothing worse than being out of batteries with a crowd sprinting at you, knowing that you could have bowled that perfect strike if only you had been more frugal. The other key differentiator here is melee combat. Now, I've seen several hit pieces online, as well as a cacophony of tweets stating how badly this is implemented. Now, I believe the reason for this is a lack of understanding on how it works. So, I've put together a Davey dodge guide.
Are you sure that this is completely necessary?
Necessary? Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine?
Probably not.
No, but I do it anyway because it's sterile and I like the taste.
Okay.
It's showtime!
React to which arm is swinging and hold the opposite direction. Switch side. Wait for opening and counterattack. The most important thing is remembering which side the enemy last attacked from. If you remember this, holding the opposite side, even if it's a different sequence, you will always dodge it. The tutorial explains it like this, but it took me far too long to realize this was the case in different sequences of attack. As long as you can react to the first swing, you should never get hit. That's the theory. In practice, I got bodied learning this lesson, and I can see why others have struggled with it so much. But ultimately, that's on you. That isn't the game's fault. As simple as the dodge mechanic is when you get the hang of it, the real skill comes in with perfect dodges. Pressing the correct direction just before you get hit will slow down time and give you the opportunity to counterattack mid-string. It's not essential, but it is satisfying when you pull it off, especially when you get a string of them in a row. For those that can't quite get the hang of the dodges, Callisto does offer you the option to hold back. This will block the hit at the expense of taking some damage. It's not something you want to get in the habit of, as those hits soon mount up. It's a decent panic option, which can set up for a leg sweep combo, but that's all it is. A panic option. Make sure to keep your head and punish them for trying to hit you. The dodging is one piece of the combat puzzle to make it feel satisfying, but it isn't the full picture. Offense is as important as defense. You need the hits to have weight, to feel the impact, to make smacking that ass feel like it's worth the risk of getting in close. That is where Callisto shines. To start with, you have access to a basic attack. With the press of R2, you can chain 3 hits together, but as the game continues, you can unlock the ability to get a gunshot follow-up, which will target an enemy's weak point for big damage. And if there's a group, you can press R1 for a heavy attack that'll send them flying. The options are there, and it's in using the right attacks at the right time and not descending into a greedy bloodlust that'll ensure you come out the victor. Now, where I see complaints arise more than anywhere is when there's multiple threats. Now, I get it. This is where the melee system is pushed to its limits. The camera focuses on the enemy you're hammering. Now, if there's 3 or more around you, you are asking to get third-partied, which leads to a no-hope situation. The first encounter with multiple threats was a wake-up call for me. I died here several times before I realized what the game was trying to teach me. Take your time, use your surroundings to your advantage, and rely on everything you've learned. Instead of running in, bat swinging like you're Negan, notice the spikes on the wall. Take stock of the explosive barrel off to the side. Thin the hood with your grip before going in for the finish with the melee. When I pulled it off successfully, it looks simple, but in reality, that was a solid 30 minutes of bashing my head into a brick wall. The main takeaway here is Callisto isn't going to hold your hand. It expects you to think, to tap into the brain matter and have a plan. And personally, I'll take that over mindless mashing of R2 any day. After a few hours of bashing brains, you'll get your mitts on an assortment of guns. There's nothing overly original here, from pistols to your heavier hitting shotgun and machine gun. Each of these weapons can then be upgraded for larger capacity, higher damage dealing, and access to an alternate fire. These alternate fire modes consume more ammunition for greater firepower or versatility. It won't take long to figure out which guns are your favourites, and as the resources required to invest into these are limited, you'll need to consider which ones you want to pour the funds into. The difference between a base weapon and its upgraded form are worlds apart, and you don't want to pump it into a weapon you're no longer reliant on, especially when you could have sunk them into your grip or your melee. For me, the standouts are the skunk gun, which is a pistol version of the shotgun, and the riot gun. Both of these make short work of an enemy, and I use them almost exclusively throughout my run. The way these upgrades are done at buying stations is identical to Dead Space, with the only difference being a single currency. The node system is gone, and in its wake are Callisto credits, and that simplification could result in a watered down upgrade system, but that's not the case. With everything sharing this one commodity, it means you need to be tactical about what you're spending your credits on. Shall you buy that new gun, or invest it into your existing ones? The choices remain the same regardless of it being nodes or credits, so it's neither here or there as far as I'm concerned. In terms of earning this currency, you can find it across the environment, but most of the time it's from the enemies themselves. The classic Isaac stomp returns, and following a quick, you'll uncover the goodies. The stomp feels more like a throwback rather than anything truly essential to the experience. Think about it. In Dead Space, you would use the stomp for much more than just opening crates. It was a way to protect yourself from threats that may come to pass. You see a body, you stomp on it, in turn stomping out the chance of infectors coming in and spawning a shit ton of necromorphs. In Callisto, you can use it to stomp an enemy to death if you want, but for the most part, it's simply there as a gathering tool, which begs the question, why the enemies don't auto-drop items to save you having to do this? It's like as if this was included just so fans of Dead Space see it in a trailer and go out and pre-order immediately. And there's a number of gameplay decisions like this that artificially slow down the player, and they are all detrimental to the experience. Now, I've already mentioned how tedious it is to backtrack in this game with how frequently you call through a vent or squeeze through a space. Well, you better get used to it, as the upgrade stores are insanely spread out, and as your inventory is limited, it doesn't take long to fill these up with precious items to sell. After a few visits back and forth during my first few hours, I found it so aggravating. I ended up leaving items that could have been resold just to save me the hassle, and this meant my careful nature with resources wasn't rewarded with credits for selling them, as I'd left them scattered all over the damn place. The worst, and I mean the worst offender of artificial slowdown, is the quick select. To even be called quick select is bordering on insulting. Look how long it takes for me to switch from a sidearm to a main gun. Not so bad, right? Yeah, what if I want to swap from a shotgun to a machine gun, or a pistol to the skunk gun? What the fuck is this about? I get serving realism, but this is insanity. Multiple times I started boss encounters with the wrong weapon equipped and had to change in the middle of combat, and each dodge you perform cancels the animation, which then needs to begin from scratch. I died so many times thanks to this, and I didn't once feel, wow, the realism. I felt pure, unbridled rage. Now, I tried to cycle weapons to ensure I never ran too low on any one gun, and each time I did this, I had to wait a lifetime before I could continue on my adventure. Do you remember when gaming went through a crazy period where they binned off weapon wheels for 2 guns at a time? I do, and it was shit. Callisto, in his strive for realism, harms its own fun factor, and it's a prime example where disbelief needs to be suspended. I don't care if Jacob has to put guns up his arse to carry 4 of them. Having a proper quick select is essential, and the lack of that is the single most annoying thing in the entire game. As I'm on a rant here, where are the puzzles? Where's the gameplay variety? You're on a moon. There's no breathable atmosphere. Gravity is about 1/9 of Earth's. Even if there wasn't puzzles, could they have done something with this? Instead, it's walk a bit, kill some enemies, crawl through vent, kill stuff, shimmy through tight crack, and repeat. The kill things and upgrade gameplay loop isn't bad, don't get me wrong, but the potential here could have been explored so much further. Outside of the gorgeous vistas, You wouldn't even know you're in a space setting, and that's a damn shame. Speaking of potential, the final negative is in the stealth system. While approaching an enemy from behind, you get an icon for a stealth kill, which downs them in one. I'd love to say it reminds me of The Evil Within, where effective use of this is crucial to thinning a herd to reserve resources, but I can't. And the reason for that is a lack of options. There's no way to lure, there's no silence weapons, no traps, or environmental hazards that you can utilize outside of grip, and so stealth is relegated for the blind enemies you encounter midway into the experience. The first time you encounter these, the tension is up as you skulk about clearing the field, learning how to combat them, but as the section continues and you see wave after wave of these enemies, it leads into tedium. So why is that? Well, let's compare this to a game which gets it right, The Last of Us. Here, you have clickers, who on their own aren't a big deal. Without sight, you can crouch up to them and get the insta-kill without too much of a problem. So to offset that, most encounters see clickers and a host of normal enemies together. This simple change results in abject terror. It forces you to plan to take out the threats that can see you, all the while staying silent to keep the clickers unaware. And if you get it wrong, you have a clicker who can and will wipe you out with one grab. Callisto doesn't use its enemies in this way. Due to its own lore, it keeps them separated. For what should be its scariest moment, it unintentionally gives the player a power trip, and that's one hell of an own goal. In summary for this section, the Callisto Protocol brings new twists to the Dead Space formula with its combat, but fails to do the simple things right in its quest for realism. It's a game where it's fun to play, but you can't quite shake the feeling that a deeper experience is just out of arm's reach. It's a flawed experience where everything that's done right is hampered by the decisions that root it into this world. Regardless of the flaws pointed out throughout this review, the one area that Callisto excels in is its presentation. Now it's important I preface this. I played the game through on the PS5 using the quality mode. This restricts it to 30 FPS, but enables ray tracing as well as a myriad of visual effects. Now I've heard from several people as well as from Digital Foundry how poorly optimized the experience is over on the Xbox and PC cams, so your experience there will be different from my own. But I'm sure this is only temporary, as Striking Distance are continually patching the game to get this under control. As far as the PS5 experience is concerned, it ran smooth as silk. I experienced the odd frame drop, but nothing that hampered the experience. Ray tracing is one of those next-gen features that makes a title feel next-gen for me. The reflections, the disbursement. It makes every scene pop, from the icy tundra of the moon's surface to the blood-soaked floor of the prison itself. Every setting is a visual feast, and it's no small thing when I state that this is the best looking game on PlayStation, bar none. And it's not just the ray tracing and art design, it's all the next-gen buzzwords you can think of. The volumetric fog which floods the scenery, obscuring your surroundings and dispersing your torchlight. The 3D audio, which embeds you into the atmosphere with the sound of rattling chains and distant moans, making you jump at the slightest whisper. The haptic feedback which is imbued into every action on screen, from the thud of a melee weapon to the slow steady steps of Jacob himself. You can really feel each and every action reverberate through the DualSense, immersing you into the world. We are 2 years into this generation, and Callisto stands tall as a game which uses its next-gen features to enhance the presentation like no other game has achieved to date. It's truly remarkable. Speaking of remarkable, I'm glad to say that Striking Distance have lent into the same diegetic HUD as Dead Space. On the back of Jacob's neck are 2 separate bars. The green corresponds to his health, and the blue is the grip. Going back to this style of design works wonders, as it frees up the HUD to let the beauty of the game shine through without the clutter that impacts most games we experience today. It doesn't go as far as Dead Space does, but that's mainly due to the lack of inclusion of features that were present in that title. There's no map, there's no waypoint marker, but for the aspects that allow this design, they are included, and that's extremely welcome. Continuing with me frothing over how good this looks, the character models. Both in and out of cutscene, they are lifelike. The sweat rolls down Jacob's head, the blood sprays across his face, and each character is perfectly brought to life in near photorealism. If you haven't got it by now, I'm over the Jovian moon with Callisto's fidelity. What's even crazier to think about is this game was built in Unreal 4. I can't imagine what's to come when we see what Unreal 5 is capable of. When it comes to the performances of the cast themselves, for the very little they have to work with, they do a good job. It's a shame that with such a talented and well-known cast, comprising of Sam Witwer, Josh Duhamel, and Karen Fukuhara, the writing doesn't give them the opportunity to dig deeper into the character and show what they are capable of. To cap off this section, I'll cover the enemy design. The biophages are the names of the creatures you'll be fighting throughout your adventure. There's 8 different types, but a couple of these are used solely for shock value when you walk into a room or open a crate, so I don't think we can really even count those. They aren't exactly a threat, they just happen. That narrows it down to 6 enemy types. Now I'm not going to get too deep on this, as to be honest, they don't really stand out. The strategy is pretty much the same with all of them. You just choose guns or melee and have at it. The only thing you need to be conscious of is which ones have tentacles growing out of them. These enemies can mutate in the middle of combat, so it's in your best interest to aim for the tentacles and take them out as soon as possible. If you don't, then that fight is going to get tougher, a lot tougher. They deal and take much more damage, and to be honest, they look goddamn disgusting. From their first appearance, it'll be beaten into you to identify these and remove the threat before they remove your head. The enemies aren't bad. The thing is, they are threats we face countless times across many video games. They look horrific, and they are all challenging in their own right, but there isn't anything here that feels original or iconic. They do the job, but that's about it. The Callisto Protocol is a solid mid-tier game with AAA aesthetics. It emanates one of the best survival horror games of all time in nearly all aspects of its design, but fails to realize what made it so iconic to begin with. The combat and upgrade loop is fun, but flawed. The plot is uninspired, lacking the depth required to draw us deeper into the world, and in the quest for realism, it takes more away from the experience than it provides. It may be the best looking game of this generation, but beauty is only skin deep. Beneath that beautiful exterior is a game which holds very little value and even less substance. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. I try to respond to everyone on my channel, so leave your thoughts on the game in the comments below and I look forward to discussing it with you. Up next, I'll be moving back to the Dead Space series where I'll be tackling Dead Space Mobile, so I hope to see you back here soon. Now if you still want a bit more from me and you're a fan of PlayStation, consider checking out my podcast In PS We Trust. We recently became a top 10% most shared podcast for Spotify, so we must be doing something right. You can find links for it in the description. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.